Good evening and welcome to the American Scouser TV EPL panel show. There are currently more people on screen right now that you're watching than there are attending any single game at the Club World Cup, it seems, which we will talk about later on tonight. We're joined by Sully and I'm sure a downhearted Glenn. How are we, boys?
I should have worn black, Macka. I've picked the wrong
should have worn black. Yeah, should have worn black. Kicking the teeth is not the phrase at all. Here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We'll talk about Thomas Frank going to Spurs. Daniel Levy, has he got a heart? Because apparently he was heartbroken about losing Big Ange Postecoglou. That's obviously a lot of bull. But we'll discuss whether chairmen actually care about these things. The transfers, what's been happening and what you hope to happen for your team and what you think of the transfers made so far in the stupid dud split transfer window nonsense. And then the Club World Cup, it's not fulfilling expectations, I don't think. And more power to that, because it was a ridiculous idea to expand it in the first place, I think. Let's just have American Scouser TV against everybody else. And then I'll be a goal because I'm fat. So let's start with the first one here. It's the important one. Now, this is not Thomas Frank at Spurs as Spurs manager. I believe he was Brentford manager for this, but it's a nice little juxtaposition of images there. We only spoke either last week or the week before, Glenn, about how you thought that maybe you'd get one more year out of Thomas Frank, and then that would be the time that he would make his move. But then Spurs jumped in and stole your thunder from you. I've been a massive, and will be still a massive fan of Thomas Frank. He's an excellent coach. But that must hurt because he gave no indication that he was unhappy at Brentford. I don't think he is unhappy at Brentford. But maybe the prospect of losing the players that he's helped build up over the past few years with like some Man United and Chelsea and maybe even Liverpool sniffing around, that must have got into his head. But what was the attraction to Spurs, do you think? And how do you feel, number one, as a Brentford fan, that the let's call him almost the Bill Shankly of Brentford right now, in the modern age at least, has gone to a rival, no less.
Yeah, no, it's devastating, isn't it, Macka? It really, really surprised me. Evening, Brian. Thanks for watching. And I would describe it as a potential poison chalice for sure going to Spurs. It sounds like a few reports and stuff have emerged that obviously Thomas Frank was open to offers at other teams, in previous years. I think he was in dialogue with Villa, maybe. I think he might have got to the top 2-3 for the Chelsea job. So it has emerged that it's, that he has, rightly so, has ambition to manage at the highest level.
Or Spurs.
Fine. Yeah, well, this is exactly the point, isn't it? This is the contradiction or the tension of this, which is, if you take Champions League out of the picture, does he still go there? I would think not. So it's interesting that maybe you think those dominoes, right? When one domino hits the others, if Man United had won the Europa League final, would Thomas Frank still be at Brentford, or would he be listening to offers from other clubs, right, as well? So I think there was shock from the Brentford fans, pretty much across the board. I think I talked confidently a couple of weeks ago with you, Macka, as you said, feeling that there's one more year left in the tank for Thomas Frank and Brentford, and he would rightly go on to a position, top club in probably a European league, maybe Germany, maybe elsewhere. I didn't think it was going to be this window. And these things, once you get the rumors, that's fine, you brush them aside. But when the rumors start gathering momentum and sources you trust within the club or the club's journalists start confirming them, that's when the alarm bells start ringing. It was enough Brentford journalists had been saying, this is really developing, that I was starting to get a little bit shocked. And fans have talked on podcasts, Brentford podcasts, the stages of grief, denial, sorrow, eventual acceptance, wherever we're variously at in that kind of timeline. But it was shocking. There is a bit of a collective grief, I think, among Brentford fans, which isn't too strong a word, I don't think, because he's embodied these clubs' values. He's taken us to the Premier League. He's been there for 7 years. For me personally, I've lived in America in a row for 6 years now. So the last Brentford manager I watched in person was Thomas Frank at Griffin Park, our old stadium, before I moved here, right? I haven't seen another Brentford game in 6 years since then. So for me, it's like we've moved stadium, we've moved division, And now finally the end of this journey for me as a fan, as basically a period of my own life in my 20s, Thomas Frank has now moved on. So yeah, it is really sad. And it was devastating because I was genuinely surprised. And I think the crux of that surprise isn't that he's ambitious and he wants and deserves a big opportunity. Is Spurs this opportunity, right? Is Spurs the club to hop off Brentford to go to? And I think that's up in the air. And I think there's loads of pros. You can say money, fan base, stadium's unbelievable. Champions League, what bigger opportunity in world football, really, European football, at a club level than to manage in the Champions League. And the flip side is obviously really poorly run club, the antithesis of Brentford. It's chaotic off the pitch. They had a dismal season. Obviously, as we discussed at length in the Premier League, finished 17th, so 7 places below us. Is that the kind of environment that I thought would be the perfect jumping off point for Thomas Frank from Brentford, right? Brentford to another opportunity was a foregone conclusion. Do I think Spurs is the right one? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I wouldn't want to work with Levy, that's for sure. He's going to cycle through managers basically every other year. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I am surprised because of the destination. I think from what we've read and the information we've received since, like, okay, the fact he's moved on probably shouldn't come as the biggest shock. It was certainly more surprising a week or two ago before those reports emerged. But yeah, do I think Spurs is the right opportunity at the right time for him? I don't think so, but he is absolutely the one to make that call. And there's a bit of frustration with Brentford fans that he's taken a bit of the back staff with him, right? Taking a few other coaches with him. I think that's fair game. I don't have a problem with that. It just is another hollowing out of the club, right, Macka? We're going to lose some key players this window. And Mbumo, Flecken's already gone. Actually was an important player for us, regardless of prior mistakes. And Mbumo's certainly off, probably to Man United, it sounds like, unless Spurs hijack it. And then is Wissa going to go? Various other people going to go? We don't know. But yeah, it feels like the end of an era. It is an unequivocal end of an era. It's been a remarkable era for Brentford fans. And there's always the fear of the unknown, but there's also just the sadness of I don't want these 7 years to have ended, right? I don't want this Premier League run, this the promotion, amazing results in the Premier League. Had we made the Conference League, would that have made a difference? I'm not sure, but it's sad that a few factors that really were at the end of the season, Spurs getting Champions League, Brentford just missing out on Europe, it feels a little sad that they may have impacted the decision. Yeah, and as Brian says, I do hope we can hold on to a core. We're amazing at recruitment like Brighton. And yeah, the promoted sides look bad, but I don't think they'll necessarily be as bad as Leeds. So, yeah, horrible couple of weeks, Macca. What a terrible way as a Brentford fan to start the summer. Really, really shocking stuff.
And then, if you're Queevy and Kelleher, you either knew this was coming or you've got the rug pulled out from under your feet on day one.
Absolutely. That was days before he's joined us, So it's crazy.
So, Sully, now, you much like Spurs, Newcastle have won their first trophy in decades. But you're also a fan of a club that is no stranger to looking for the next Messiah, almost like Liverpool always looking for that next Bill Shankly after years in the wilderness. It's a common thing. Obviously Brentford isn't one of the storied trophy-winning clubs of the past, but their story was every bit, I think, as inspirational as Leicester's getting up into the Premier League, and then especially. After that Watford playoff game, that was like almost like the start of that particular story, which ended with the relegation. But as well as Newcastle is famous for its number 9s. It's famous for always having that Alan Shearer type, that Malcolm McDonald type up front, Andy Cole, Les Ferdinand, always that like focal point. But also the managers, because you always put great stock into who's the manager going to be, and there's been some great Newcastle managers. I wouldn't class Kevin Keegan as necessarily a great objective manager, but he did bring a lot of great times to Newcastle and a lot of hope. Bobby Robson, just a class act all around, a fantastic manager in general. You also had Alvarez as well, didn't you?
I think you're forgetting Steve McLaren.
Steve McLaren,
Rafa Benitez. I think you're forgetting Steve Bruce. Come on, put some respect on their names.
Well, now to be fair, Rafa Benitez actually won things before you went there. You know what I mean? But what my point is that you understand how important the manager can be to the package and how getting the wrong one can set a lot of progress back a lot of years in the space of half a season, even let alone one season. So you must feel a little bit of empathy towards Brentford there, that they've been getting their act together for so long and so well. And the guy who was essentially the tactical architect of it, if not the structural one, is now gone. And there is an air of uncertainty, isn't there, about what might come next?
No, 100%. And anytime you have a manager in place, like Glenn, you said Thomas Frank's been there for 7 years, correct?
Yeah.
So anytime you have a manager who's there for nearly a decade, the longest period of sustained success at a club, whoever takes that job next is toast. Like, you cannot look at the next guy. The next guy will not be the Messiah. You're going to have to look 2 or 3 down the road. That's simply how it goes. I mean, after we thought Alan Pardew was a low-key Messiah, and Alan Pardew still has a soft spot in, I think, just about every Geordie heart. But at the same time, he wasn't that great. But for us, he was. I mean, for us, he got us some European football. He got us top 10 finishes. And when he left, we backslid super hard. So, Glenn, I think, and Macka, I think Brentford just needs to worry about staying up. I agree that I think the clubs who just got promoted will not, I don't think they're going to be terribly threatening. I am super excited for Newcastle Sunderland again for the first time in nearly a decade. It's been a very long time. And when we were playing them in the Premier League, even as they were getting relegated, they were beating us. There is some unfinished business there. I know we beat them, I want to say, in the FA Cup, either this year or last year. But that being said, there's some unfinished business. But back to Brentford, I think Brentford just needs to worry about staying up. They're good with recruitment. I think more so than losing Frank, I think losing some of your backroom people are going to be almost a bigger blow to you guys, because you do recruit very, very well. A lot of those guys are homegrown players. A lot of those guys have been at the club for a very long time. So I think it's going to be more the back room people that hurt Brentford, that are going to be the loss for Brentford. But now, looking at Thomas Frank, give me 1 second. My dog's whining.
Because of Thomas Frank, Glenn. He's whining because of Thomas Frank. Even the dogs feel it.
Come here. I'm back for the moment. But this will be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see if Thomas Frank can have the success he had at Brentford through his tactics with a club like Tottenham. Tottenham's roster is all over the place. I mean, I'm looking at their current players in. I believe Mathis Tell was the biggest one from Bayern Munich. It's going to be interesting to see what he can do with a roster that's, for better or for worse, seems like it was almost haphazardly thrown together. He had 7 years to put together his group of players and steadily climbed up the Premier League every single year. We'll see what Levy says after year one, because I think Frank has his work cut out for him in trying to figure out tactically what to do with his team, which tactically has been pretty awful the last few years. When they the classic 6-1 game against Newcastle, where they played a back three for the first time all season, that was a bloodbath. So we're gonna have to see if Thomas Frank adapts his tactics to the roster he has now, or if he's going to try and force these players to play the style that he wants to.
Now, just to go back a little bit to Brentford and a Newcastle comparison, like I grew up with that Bobby Robson team, like getting into Europe and into the Champions League and being fairly well respected and a good young team playing good football. But it seems, I was just looking at the list of managers, it just seems like a conveyor belt of managers then trying to get back to that with various degrees of success and failure. Glenn, are you at all afraid as a fan of Brentford that might end up being what happens, is that Thomas Frank has raised the bar so high for Brentford that your front office, whatever you call it, whatever the equivalent would be in soccer, or your director, chairman, or whatever, are going to start chasing their tails, trying to get a replacement? Or are you confident that they are more structured, like Brighton is structured, where there's a lot of things that are going on in the background? That means that the success will continue, and it may waver up and down a little bit, but it won't be, the devastating drop that Newcastle used to have, or that Leicester had after finishing fifth twice in a row. That your internal structure is strong enough that you can handle this. You can handle this departure, and you can trust that they will pick the right man to take over.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the latter. I mean, Thomas Frank's success is also the product of a highly sophisticated and very well organized, front office, as you said, Macka, right? The stuff that happens off the field is often equally, if not more impressive than the results we've put in on the pitch. So, yeah, I feel the latter. I feel we're grounded. I don't think there's going to be any, implosion or just chaos. I think it's going to be calm, collected, and Matthew Benham, the owner, Phil Giles, director of football, they've been through a lot, and I think they've got the patience and the calm to make the right change happen. I think that's going to happen. Nonetheless, as kind of Sully said, does it change our short-term plans? Absolutely. How could it not? If you're going to lose Thomas Frank, you're going to lose Mbeumo, you're going to lose maybe one or two others. We've changed keeper. We've got a great keeper in, but that's still someone who's used to playing with our back line. Even players like Collins, are potentially, if it depends if Thomas Frank wants to try and, bring a few players over to Spurs, that would cause even more chaos for us, I think. So, I totally trust the ownership. The people in charge of the club have done a remarkable job and continue to do that. That's not a worry for me. The worry is really that, it kind of puts a stopper, right? It really just puts a roadblock in front of this progress we've had. And it means instead of continuing it for at least one more season and maybe trying to hit that 8th, 7th spot, kind of means that you got to, reset. As Sully said, right? Suddenly, instead of chasing Europe, the first thing we're probably all thinking subconsciously is staying out of the bottom 3. And that shift in mentality is kind of a bitter pill to swallow after such a thoroughly enjoyable first couple of years in the Premier League and such a brilliant end to this season, right? We were a real force to be reckoned with towards the end of the season. We were beating everybody away from home. So, yeah, it just becomes basically something that I thought I'd savor. I thought I'd savor one more season, kind of as the status quo was. And it means we're really hitting a huge transition. And there's just no guarantee that the new manager, whoever we decide, and Brian said McKenna in the chat, I'm not super fond of that. I don't think he was very impressive this season. You can put asterisks everywhere with his Ipswich season, but I think the recruitment was poor. I think their performances were poor, and I think they deserve to go down. And he did nothing in terms of charisma or tactics that made me think I want him as the new manager. It was kind of, for me at least, that would be living off his reputation before they got promoted and being there's this young, exciting manager who's smashing it in the Championship. I don't think his Premier League season was anything to celebrate. But yeah, it's also a case of who do you recruit, right? There's some European names being mentioned. The manager who just left Ajax is being floated. There's Keith Andrews as the continuity candidate, who's our set piece coach, and obviously former player. And Irish. Not much enthusiasm for him, I don't think at all. But that's the continuity candidate because Thomas Frank was promoted from within, and that worked a charm. A lot of question marks, and none of these things will be answered, right, Macka, until the transfer window shuts, or till first the manager's appointed, and B, the transfer window shuts, and we see who's left, but more importantly, who we've brought in. Because I think a top half finish this coming season would be a huge feat, and really, if you're talking about a rebuild, 15th, 14th, 15th, maybe getting to a cup, quarter or semi or something that's probably the ceiling. So yeah, it's just a shame to lower your expectations so heavily the first week of the summer, right, Macka? You're kind of dreaming, and we knew Mbeumo would leave and stuff, but to lower it off the bat is kind of hard.
Macka, can I jump in real quick?
Yep.
One of the, Glenn, one of the things you were saying was how well the end of this season ended. And, it's heartbreaking to have this happen after, the run you guys had. One of the things that I think is also going to hurt, and this is something as a Newcastle fan, I still deal with, is trying to build international support for one of these mid-table clubs. And, with NBC picking up the Premier League, it exposes people to a lot more soccer than they were ever able to watch. You can watch every game over the course of a Saturday and a Sunday. With that, somebody who might have been watching Brentford last year and been like, wow, this is a really fun team. This is a team I want to keep watching. This is a team I'll buy merchandise for. If they come on a US tour, I'm going to go see them. I'm going to go see them play. You lose some of that. And that is sort of the double body blow.
Yeah.
With losing a manager like Frank, somebody who played a very attractive style of soccer, losing Mbumo also, somebody who was a human highlight reel.
Yeah.
Though that sucks. That really hurts. And as a Newcastle fan, I know that well. Going Andy Carroll, Alan St. Maxim, like those were household names. And when we lost them, it was like, well, I don't need to watch Newcastle anymore because these players aren't there anymore. So I have a lot of sympathy for you, and I hope you guys stay in that top half of the table this season, because I've been there and it's no fun.
Let me ask you this, Glenn, just for comparison's sake, Liverpool lost an iconic manager and we got a replacement who we didn't know too much about. We just know he had some success in Holland, which we obviously to be definitely a weaker league than the Premier League. And then also we saw what happened with Ten Hag at Man United. But Jurgen Klopp and the people in the back room, to their credit, left a fantastically strong structure for Liverpool that Arne Slot, because he's so smart, just came in and did little tweak here, little tweak there, league title. Now, obviously, Brentford aren't going to be thinking about winning the league title with the new manager, but do you get the sense as a fan, as a supporter, that the infrastructure is strong enough that a new manager can come in, little tweak here, little tweak there, and you'll actually potentially do a lot better than you think you would with the new manager change?
Yeah, I'd like to think, I guess I like the analogy. I guess the difference is the squad was pretty much identical, right? He was working with. I think the tricky thing is, part of this blow for us is not only is the master tactician going and this incredible motivator, this really eloquent speaker, the players who have been so key to his success, Mbumo, 20 goals, right? Wissa, stacks of goals if he goes as well. Like, I think it's going to be extra challenging because we're losing personnel as well. But I agree, Macka, with the sense that with football, right, there's usually an inherent pessimism with fans, right? Obviously, with Liverpool fans, it was going to be, well, we're not going to be title contenders because it's a transition, it's a rebuild for us. And nobody really had picked Liverpool as title winners at the start of the season. Just because there is change, it doesn't immediately and inherently make that necessarily bad. If we were going to keep the same squad and change manager, then, things change. Maybe keeping it fresh and having a new tactics in there and stuff might be exciting for the fans. I think it's just tough because, Thomas Frank, as you said, Sully, played such clever and attractive football. He pivoted when he had to, unlike some managers in the league, and he played horrible football when we had to in our season before last, where things looked really rough and we played very defensively and was successful at doing that. But by and large, his identity as a manager is really progressive, exciting football. And it's tricky to see a manager building on that in the same way. But to your point, Mackie, yes, Liverpool, obviously, it's an end of an era with Klopp going. It's an end of an era with Frank going. But because the behind-the-scenes stuff was so well built, the foundations were so solid, it really allowed Slot to come in and work his magic because he could work with a great group and he could work with the fan base. And he could work with the management. And with Liverpool and Brentford, that is pretty unusual. And I do think Frank will have, I don't want to say a rude awakening, but he'll certainly have issues at Spurs that he did not have to face when he was with us. And he might not have had to face if he had gone to Liverpool, for example. So I'd like to be optimistic. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a terrible season, but from a fan's perspective, losing your best player and your celebrated manager probably within 2 weeks of each other, it's going to be a sad note to dive into the transfer window on.
Now, before we move on, Sully, how do you think Frank will do at Spurs? Because you don't have any bias, unfortunately, the way Ken will have. But you know, I think he's a good coach, and he plays a progressive style of football, as opposed to, let's say, Tony Pulis, who I always thought he was a good coach. He got his ideas across to his players, but it was a very negative, self-defeating almost style of football. It wasn't a style that went out and said, I'm confident that you boys can win this game. It was, I'm confident you boys cannot lose it. Whereas Frank is like, we can do this. We can bloody some noses here. But is that the right mentality for what Spurs need? They just won a trophy that hoodoo is done with. It's almost like a fresh start for the new Spurs manager, but it's still Spurs. It's still a basket case of a club.
Yeah. I think you summed it up perfectly. It's a basket case of a club. Will the owners keep their hands out of Thomas Frank's affairs? We'll see what happens. Will Hong Sung-min stay with the club? We'll see what happens. Who are they going to bring in over this transfer window? We'll see what happens. They've spent a lot of money, and I know they're getting that Champions League spot, but like, how much more can they have? They've never really replaced Harry Kane. Solanke is oftentimes injured. Arguably the best player is Van de Ven, who is also frequently injured. So we'll see. I mean, Frank could be one of these guys who makes chicken salad out of chicken shit, but we'll see what happens. I mean, I think it's going to. I think by early August, we are going to have a very firm idea of what this Tottenham season is going to look like when we get to actual matches.
Glenn, one more thing, because that's a good point that Sonny makes. One of the topics I think we've spoken about before, maybe on the Thursday podcast, was that, for all Big Ange's great ideas, he was running his players into the ground, and he could complain all he wants about not having his best centre-back pairing available for most of the season, but they weren't getting crumpled in tackles. They were pulling up because they had muscle injuries, because they were being run into the ground. What is your experience of Thomas Frank and injuries, and do you think, is he a smart enough coach to understand the sports science behind it and to know when to pull, let go of the reins a little bit and let the players, have an extra rest day here and there? Is he a smart guy? You may be an on-field tactician, but is he also a physical preparation tactician who knows when to push players and when to hold it back a little bit to maintain the strongest squad he can throughout the season? And if so, how's that going to help Spurs going forward?
Yeah, I hope so. It's interesting, for all the Spurs and many other clubs like Arsenal complaints about injuries. Like, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a team across at least the last 3 seasons that's experienced more injuries than Brentford. Certainly the season prior to this one was catastrophic for injuries, and was tricky to figure out how many of them were, what type of impact they were, right? Is it collisions? Is it injuries and challenges? Or is it just being worked too hard? Probably some kind of mixture. But I also think, Frank has obviously followed exceptionally closely, as he's a rival club and manager at the time, what Ange has done at Spurs and what landed and what didn't. And it's clear that the whole running in them into the ground became really, self-destructive and detrimental to Ange's own project. So I do think it is something he would want to be especially attentive to going into the club, right? That there were these injuries last season. They were, I wouldn't say self-inflicted, but they certainly weren't helped by Ange's strategy. And that's got to be something to watch for Frank. And yeah, we've suffered loads of injuries under him, but I don't think many people at the club would say it was overwork. I think it really was just like a huge string of bad luck. And, a thin squad, right? This is the thing. Brentford have a thinner squad than most teams in the Premier League. So you always have to overplay your players, right? It might not be overworking them, but certainly we can't rest and rotate as much as a club like Liverpool or Arsenal or anyone probably else in the top 10. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm obviously curious to watch how it unfolds. It's a high profile appointment. It's been pretty crazy, Macka. Brentford has been the club. I don't think I've ever said this in my entire life, that's been the front of Sky Sports News, BBC News, ESPN Soccer, whatever. It has been relentlessly Brentford news for about 2 weeks now, whether it's Mbumo to probably United, whether it's Frank. So, yeah, it's a high-profile appointment, and he's going to be under the microscope from day one. I think the Spurs fan base was probably, what do we think, like 60-40, 70-30 maybe in favor of letting Ange go, maybe. Hard to quantify, at least 60-40, I'd say, fans I know. So, yeah, we'll see. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's certainly harder than maybe Frank anticipates going in there.
Macka, one last thought. I think it's going to be almost more interesting to see if Mbumo can keep up his form if and when he goes to Manchester United. I think that is going to be far more telling of the state of Brentford. If he shows up to Old Trafford day one and as Erasmus Højlund, I think that speaks volumes to Frank as a manager and Brentford as a structural club. So I'm going to keep a special eye on that because I think that's going to be a very, very interesting storyline to follow during this Prem season.
Definitely.
And I think the best indication for Thomas Frank will be how quickly he loses his hair beak to on the sidelines. Now, let's stick with Spurs for a second. Let's talk about Daniel Levy and his... I'm going to call them crocodile tears about having to sack Ange Postecoglou.
Do we have to?
This is the man who sacked Jose Mourinho, one of the most successful managers of the millennium, of the beginning of the millennium. A week before a cup final, a man who's almost guaranteed to win trophies when he gets to finals. Here is a picture of Daniel Levy for anybody who's not sure what he looks like. But here's a broader question, Sully. I'll start with you, especially for somebody who's had ownership changes and ownership drama for, let's say, 20 years. It starting with the it was Sir John Hall, wasn't it? The kind of the local boy made good, who pumped his money in to get his boyhood club, much like Jack Walker at Blackburn, to get success for his club, to now being shamelessly owned by an oil state type situation. But nevertheless, a lot of drama going on there. Daniel Levy seems to be the sole source of drama at Spurs, more so than anything in United, because there seems to be internal battles being waged there. Makes us grateful as Liverpool fans that FSG seem to be fairly under the radar after all the years of Hicks and Gillette and the club almost going out of existence. But is there a sense, do you think, and I know chairmen and owners have always had a bit of an ego, but is there a sense that Daniel Levy and maybe a few other chairmen and club owners and sporting directors, whatever, think that they are the story and not the people on the pitch and not the people in the dugouts? Because even Abramovich, for all the money he pumped into Chelsea, you never really heard anything from him. He just quietly did. If a manager needed to be sacked, he was sacked. If a player needed to be bought, he was bought. You knew he was there, but you didn't really know what he was doing because he never had any public pronouncements and he was never the main part of the story. But Daniel Levy seems to be the guy, doesn't he? He almost wants to be seen to be the guy that has all the strings working away.
Well, if you look at successful teams, it seems like the club president is the mouthpiece for the team. And unsuccessful teams, the owner is the mouthpiece for the team. And I don't think this just applies to soccer. I think anytime you have a loudmouth owner who thinks they are the ones who people are paying tickets to come see, that's when you run into issues. That's where you run into an ego. If you are an owner, you have to check your ego at the door. Your job is to, I've said this before on this show, your job is to write the checks. Your job is to sign on the dotted line, and that's about it. If you want to engage in stadium negotiations to build a new park, that's fine. You don't address team-related things if you are the owner. You're above that. You're the bank for the team. Like, that's your job. Everybody else has to do with the footballing side. You as an owner didn't get into this position because you know a ton about soccer. There's no point in you getting involved. The president needs to be the mouthpiece for the team. I think Levy is you know 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from the Nottingham Forest manager. But he's a major issue, and if he wants his team to do well, he needs to shut up. There's a reason why the Cowboys haven't won anything since the mid 90s in the NFL. Jerry Jones sticks his hands where they don't belong. So I cannot stand it. It's one of the best things that Newcastle is, or the Saudis have done for Newcastle, is they have let the football people handle the football decisions. They have not gotten involved directly with a lot of things. Mike Ashley only ever got involved when he said, "No, I'm not paying that amount of money." The owners need to take a step back. That amount of money does not give you free reign to do whatever you want on a football field because you own the team. You don't know what you're doing. Take a step back.
I mean, Glenn, that's a good point, because I couldn't point. You could throw me a list of 10 names and I wouldn't know who the manager, the president of Brentford is. And to me, we're going by Sully's logic. That's a very good indication that the people who do the background stuff know that that's their job. It's in the background. They may get an odd interview in, NBA Monthly or something like that. Business Weekly pre-season. This is a guy who runs a club thing, but that's it. Nobody's buying that magazine, and it's only going to be read at business class on airplanes or something. But it strikes me almost, if we're looking at people like Levy. I'm not sure I agree with Mike Ashley, because he did a ton of that, jumping in with the fans and all that, and drinking beer with the lads when he first started. But that was probably just because
he was a walking advertisement for Greg's.
He really was. But he was probably maybe the last of that breed of local boy made good who wanted to just build his club up. I'm not entirely sure about that, but if a soccer fan nonetheless, who's got the keys to the toy shop. But it seems to me like people like Levy are, look, it astounds me in American sports, and we've talked about this on the Thursday Night podcast. It astounds me that at the end of the Super Bowl or whatever, the owner gets the trophy first. Not the one who throws the ball, not the one who catches the ball, not the one who's taken like 50 hits in the playoffs and his spine is hanging on by a thread. Not the coach who's managed to invest in these players, 34 players or something like that, with 101 plays that they have to memorize, and motivated them to know each one and to operate it as expertly as possible. No, it's the guy who sits up there with his friends and his trophy wife. He gets to hold the trophy first, like he did it all by himself. Do you think then, as an expat like myself, do you think that that's maybe a little bit endemic of what's creeping into the European game in soccer, that the chairman is taking more of a front role that they don't really deserve?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Obviously, we saw it with Nottingham Forest was the big example recently. We've obviously talked about those kind of disgraceful scenes when he's shouting at the at Nuno about some injury allegedly. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, a lot of these owners just have big egos, right? That comes with accumulating all this capital. And yeah, you don't get the sense that a lot of owners are very grounded or have, much calm or very humble. So yeah, it's tricky, but yeah, it's a good point. We certainly shouldn't be. Yeah, there's no reason really for us to be talking about owners' personalities unless they've kind of stuck their head above the parapet and causing scenes or causing a work environment, such as the case at Spurs, that seems really addicted to just hiring and firing. And the other constant throughout all these managers who have been and gone through Spurs is Levy, right? He's stayed there, and it's always frustrating from a fan's perspective that their job is never under scrutiny, right? Or maybe it's under scrutiny, but it's never in question. And this is the wonderful hypocrisy of being rich enough to bankroll a club, or in theory to bankroll them. Maybe you're actually going to extract money from them, as we've seen with Glazers and many other owners, that they just use these clubs to enrich themselves further. Of course, that's probably the point. But yeah, I think, the less owner personalities we have across all sports, but certainly in the EPL, the better. Because I prefer to talk about the football. I prefer to talk about the tactics. I prefer to talk about the fans. Shouldn't really be wasting our breath having to, dissect the decisions of these owners who are just extremely selfish and quite often very antagonistic to other people in the sport.
Absolutely. Do you think, like I think, that good owners, and I'm so glad that, John Henry is almost practically invisible at Liverpool, except when we're wanting him to sign Florian Wirtz, like yesterday, please, thanks. But they're like referees. You shouldn't know the name of a good referee. You should just be the man that whistles at the start and whistles at the end and collects the ball on the 95th minute or whatever it is. And that, we only knew Pierluigi Collina as a referee because of his look. You wouldn't notice his refereeing because he was so in command of that field as a referee. That the memes are all just him getting pissed off with players. Like I've had enough now. I've had enough. But other than that, if he didn't look the way he did, you wouldn't notice him. He was that good. But that's what a chairman should be, shouldn't it? You should know him because you're a fan of the club. You shouldn't know him because you're a fan of a club in a division below. But everybody knows who Daniel Levy is, and that's part of the problem for Spurs, isn't it?
100%, and that's part of the problem with Bowley at Chelsea also. Everybody knows who this person is. And when you're that rich, there is something to be said for operating in anonymity. Your skill as an owner is measured on your transfers. That's what it is. How have you built up the fan experience? That's all you should do. So yeah, I Macka, what was your original question? Sorry, I keep getting I keep getting soapboxy here.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with a soapbox on a podcast, but just we shouldn't notice who the chairman is or the owner is. It should only be the fans of the club who really know the details. But there's too many owners that everything about. That somebody like Glenn who supports Brentford can talk about Todd Bowley. When Todd Bowley, other than the derby games, Todd Bowley shouldn't have any influence on anything that Brentford fan does. But we got to talk about him because he's in the paper.
Yeah, and I think that is a detriment to the sport itself, as well as all these teams that people like that own. I mean, I watch a lot of soccer video essays, and I think about soccer video essays dealing with Eastern Europe and the Balkans, where you have these sort of outrageous owners and the chaotic nature of those leagues. You have a guy who buys a team, gets them promoted all the way, wins a championship, and then the next season they're at the bottom division because of all the financial scandal behind the scenes. So yeah, owners need to only be known to the people who support their club. Otherwise, get out. You show up on the Jumbotron once a game, have the people cheer for you, and that's it.
And I think talking about transfers and the fact that chairmen are the ones that ultimately are responsible for that and are going to be judged on that leads us to the next and the second last thing we talk about tonight is the transfers of the season. It's such a screwy way to do it this year. They should have just, as far as I'm concerned, had the opening of that transfer 1st of June or whatever it was, and then just left it at that. But 1 week and then a break and then back into it just seems ridiculous. From Dara Azizi, mate, it was good to see you tonight. But this is the EPL panel show. This is where we get to talk about all the other teams that aren't Liverpool, and more power to it as well, because it's always an enjoyable conversation. But Glenn, now you're I would imagine more concerned with transfers out than transfers in this particular window. Who are you going to be left with? You did bring in Kelleher. I think that's a great appointment.
Yeah.
But I also think it's a short term, but I don't think Kelleher's there to be Brentford's keeper for the next 10 years. I think he's probably there to be to show what he could do as the number one before moving on, which is unfortunate, but that's just the lay of the land for most clubs that aren't in the top 7, top 8 of finances, etc. But what do you think of the transfers overall this season going in and out of the Premier League? I mean, Florian Wirtz looks he's going to go for a crap ton of money, like more money than Liverpool have ever spent. And it's highly unusual that we would spend that amount of money. And I'm shocked that they would do that after the disaster of Darwin Núñez. But there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of movement, does it? Like Cunha going to Man United, I wouldn't be inspired by that signing if I was a Man United fan, but it seems like clubs look, apart from Florian Wirtz, clubs look to be plugging gaps rather than making statements. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's hard, as you said, Macka. It's like it's so weird, this transfer window, opening, shutting, opening again. The Club World Cup has kind of overshadowed some of this, and we'll get onto that before we wrap up in a few minutes. And that's kind of overshadowed some of this transfer speculation anyway, because players are working, so that's kind of confusing. It's really tricky, isn't it? I mean, we just got a question in the chat about how worried we are, about Brentford being a spot of bother with Frank and the players off. As I said earlier, that it's tough to have both those things simultaneously. So from the transfer angle, you can't replace Mbeumo's 20 goals. You're not going to get a forward that's going to magically score you 20 goals in the Premier League. It took him 3 seasons to build up to that. I mean, he really couldn't hit a barn door. First couple months in the Premier League, like he was very erratic, and he had to develop his game, building from the Championship to the Premier League, but also just building in the Premier League season on season. You're just not going to get that replaced immediately. So I am worried about that. And it just really depends on how many of our players are picked off, right? As I said earlier, is Spurs going to be in for a couple more? I know Frank loves working with Collins. Wissa's super popular, great figure. He's been wanted from other clubs before, and we've rebuffed that for some very cheap bids, I think, from Forest in January. But we'll see. But as you said, Macka, in terms of the market, it is quiet at the minute. I think teams are still adjusting to the fallout from the season, right? We look at these managerial changes that have to be figured out before transfers can even be made. As we said earlier, Kelleher coming in and then Frank leaving, that's quite unusual for a big marquee signing to immediately change manager. He was possibly not expecting that. So I think it's tricky with the Club World Cup creating buzz and distracting players and dragging players away from like their relaxation. And there's been nothing that exciting. I mean, Cunha we kind of knew about before the season was even over. Mbeumo we kind of knew was going to be leaving to somebody before the season was over. So nothing. Wirtz has been the main one and is very exciting, but it is a huge stack of money, which means huge expectations, which regardless of his quality, which is undoubtable, that is a huge burden to place on a player in a new league, especially the Premier League. They're not to be exceptionalist, but it is physical, right? It's demanding. And players who have succeeded in other equally as good leagues in many ways have really struggled to come to terms with that physicality, especially up front. So a little underwhelming so far, but right, it's June 17th. We've got ages, right? The fixtures, Premier League fixtures aren't even announced yet. They're out tomorrow, right? So there are so many moving pieces. I'm not surprised with this kind of unique summer where we have a huge competition that's polarizing. We have managers moving. We have teams making Europe when we thought they wouldn't. All of the financials are changing because of that, right? So we're just going to have to wait and see. But it's been a pretty quiet start to the window, I'd say.
If it doesn't work out, it could be the Wirtz thing that happens to Liverpool this season.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's that nonsense over with. I should be chairman of a football club. Sully, here's my question to you as a Newcastle fan. You got that trophy against Liverpool and fairly well earned, and probably, from the fact of Newcastle fans just being a fantastic set of fans, you kind of wanted them to get something to be happy about other than frozen nipples and new tattoos and a Cornish pasty. But what are your expectations? Now we talk about, that as Glenn said, clubs kind of coming down from the end of that season. But we, as Liverpool fans, already know that Trent Alexander-Arnold had been working for 2 years for that move to Real Madrid. So much so that he learned fluent Spanish, apparently. So we know that moves happen in the background that we don't know about and that don't even get leaked. Are you looking for a marquee signing, do you think? Isak moving away from Newcastle seems to be a story. But, is there deficiencies that you really want to see some sort of action or even some sort of link that tells you that they're not going to rest on their laurels? Because that is the big crime sometimes when you win a trophy is, oh, this is good enough. It happens to the promoted teams all the time. Oh, we came up with this bunch of lads, so they'll keep us in the Premier. Oh, okay, we're 20 points down, 17 games in. Crap.
Yeah, in terms of players we're being linked with, João Pedro is by far the biggest marquee signing, and I think that's going to be critical in Champions League. I have a feeling Callum Wilson is out the door. Yeah, he was a great steward for the club, but he's made of tissue paper and glass. Like he can't stay healthy. So I mean, João Pedro is our biggest name. However, I don't really want a marquee signing. I was talking to a friend about this afternoon that, if you look at a team like PSG that just won the Champions League, the bare minimum the bare minimum fee for starting at PSG is 60 million. Like that is the minimum. So, I would like to see us bring in quantity almost more than quality at this point. I would like to see us bring in 3 to 4 Premier League ready players who can help us with this next push, this next chapter in the Newcastle United story. I don't think. I think the days of clubs being dominated by one superstar or having like that talismanic player, I think it's kind of done. Isak is our talismanic player, but Isak fits our system. Isak is not an Mbappe. He's not a Messi. He's not a Neymar. He's not a Ronaldo. So I don't. I would be very hesitant to bring in £100 million player when I think the team is good enough. We have to have reserves. We have to have secondary and even tertiary lineups for the amount of soccer that we are going to play this season. Now, with the Club World Cup, I think a lot of teams are waiting to the end of it to see who's in shape, like who's fit and who's not, who picks up a knock. Is that somebody we really want to bring in for this amount of money? And on top of that, I think a lot of teams are looking at, not the Chelseas, not the Bayern Munichs, not those teams. I think a lot of teams are going to be looking at, not necessarily to say Auckland City, but River Plate, Boca Juniors. Who are players we can get off of those squads? Who are some of these South American, some of these African, some of these Asian players who we can pick off of a team because they got hot during the Club World Cup? I think for all the crap that the Club World Cup represents, I think it'll be a very interesting exercise in mid-season scouting in early transfer window scouting, because we see this every summer when there's a Euros, when there's a World Cup. Players who shine on that stage are players who get picked up in the next transfer window. I think back to, Russia had that incredible run. Andrei Arshavin picked up by Arsenal right before the season starts. Roman Pavlyuchenko picked up by Tottenham right before the season starts. Zhirkov picked up by Chelsea right before the season starts. So I think it's going to come down. I think the transfer window is really going to get hot by the time we hit like the quarterfinals of the Club World Cup. I think teams will have seen enough. I think teams will have seen players they might want to poach and possibly be able to poach on the cheap. So, we'll see what happens, but Newcastle back to your original question, Newcastle has to bring in 3 to 4 Premier League ready players. We haven't brought any Premier League ready players in since Sandro Tonali. It'd be awesome if some of our youth system started to turn out. All these players we have on loan. We've got this guy, Antonio Cordero, who we got on a free transfer from Malaga. really interesting player. So we'll see what happens. But I think we are going to need to see some of these early investments by the Saudis start to pay off, as well as bringing in Premier League ready recruits. And, I saw some chatter about Isak. Isak isn't necessarily the player I'm most worried about losing. Livramento, there's a lot of talk about him leaving, and Livramento is a critical piece of our team. Osula is who I was thinking about. This kid seems like he's ready for the show. He seems like a Newcastle type player. I mean, when Dan Burns scored in the Carabao Cup final, he ran over and celebrated with Osula, who has not played more than 15 Premier League minutes this season. So, yeah, we got to shore up the ranks, because that's where our issues are going to come out.
So the Jason Tyndall of players rather than the Eddie Howe.
Yes.
That's probably the best way to put it.
Yes.
So because we're going to wrap up soon, so we won't spend too much time on this because it doesn't really deserve that much time. But I just want to get your lads' opinions on the Club World Cup. It's been a big dull dud so far. 10-0 for Bayern Munich against Auckland City. 3 people and a goat showing up to the Chelsea game. Then, as somebody whose club is not probably going to be invited to the Club World Cup anytime soon, but as a fan, does this interest you at all? Because it seems like they've made an absolute mess of the marketing of it, and they're practically giving tickets away at this point.
Yeah, it's obviously a cash grab and a prestige event for Infantino and FIFA. We know that. It's looked underwhelming. I mean, the tickets kind of speak for themselves, don't they? They're slashing ticket prices. A couple of really empty-looking stadiums so far, and it's just it just feels unnecessary. You can talk, whether it's about player welfare, whether it's about fan welfare. Some fans talking about it was dangerously hot in the Rose Bowl on Sunday, and there was lack of water and stuff like that. So it just feels like a bad time to be staging something in the US for many reasons, temperature politics, whatever else. Certainly a hostile setting for some people traveling. And it feels like a cash grab as a concept. So, it's been underwhelming. I think it's probably going to be underwhelming throughout. It just doesn't feel very necessary, does it, Macka? It just feels... So Mr. Battle Red said, a bit jealousy from teams that aren't there. I mean, obviously some teams have missed out, and that doesn't reflect like the best teams in the world, right? If Liverpool aren't there. But regardless, I think most neutrals or fans of teams who would never be there, like me, it feels like it's a needless tournament. It's part of this, almost like a proxy war, almost, between UEFA and FIFA, and just, really struggling for these marquee tournaments. It just seems flat. It's looked flat so far. It's looked hot. It's looked empty. It's looked tired. I don't think we're going to see many iconic kind of games really throughout it. When we reach the knockouts, maybe it will spark into life. The Nations League was derided by some people, and that pleasantly surprised me. It was nice for friendlies to have a little bit more meaning to them. And as we saw in the semi-finals and final recently, the Nations League really did deliver us some excellent football. I'm skeptical that will come with the Club World Cup. We've seen some big mismatches, of course, which is just like a consequence of the format, I guess, in some ways. But it just seems poorly run, poorly staged, and just not really. There's just other things I prefer to be watching and doing than, Chelsea, kicking it around, kicking it past the American team they played a day or two ago.
So, I mean, for me, I'm not sure I agree with Mr. Battered's point. And he obviously makes some good points week to week for us on our podcast. But I will watch the World Cup when Ireland aren't in it. It's not a jealousy thing. I will watch it because I know I'm going to get some good football, and it's a great occasion. But FIFA have not been able to transfer that excitement into this tournament, have they?
No, not even close. And I've shouted him out before on this channel but HTC Sevens did an incredible video today talking about the issues with the Club World Cup. And I got to say, Newcastle is going to win it because this thing is basically funded by the Saudis. The Saudis paid, or pardon me, excuse me, bought a share of DAZN right before this happened for $1 billion. How much did DAZN get the Club World Cup rights for? $1 billion. So that's just going to be another trophy we host in the next few years. So I'm actually a very big Club World Cup supporter. But where this seems to be prevalent is South America. South America really loves the Club World Cup because it gives their teams a chance to play against Champions League level teams. So I think this has legs, but the rollout of this was so piss poor that it got cut off at the knees before it had any chance.
I mean, they used to have the Toyota Cup where it was the South American champions against the European Cup champions. There was no harm in bringing that back and maybe expand it to 4 teams or whatever. But I think this has just been an absolute, badly publicized, badly organized, and badly recruited load of nonsense.
However, I will say the Benfica Boca Juniors game was fantastic. 2 red cards, 2-2 final. That looked like it was the final for a major tournament. So, hopefully we get a couple more of these mixed in. Hopefully we get a Cinderella story. Some team, Auckland City, if they had made it a contest against Bayern Munich, Hollywood would never pick that script up because it seems too ridiculous. So we'll see what happens, but I don't have a lot of faith in this, and I don't like that it's on DAZN. I know it's free, but just put it on YouTube TV where I can watch it, and I only have to hit one button.
I mean, to be fair, they also did pick up the script to try, so we wouldn't trust Hollywood for anything. With that said, everybody, thank you for sticking with us for the hour. It is time for all of us to go to beddy, boys. Make sure you're following us on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram and X and Blue Sky and Mastodon and all the other things. Like and subscribe because that's how you know when the good things happen. A big thanks to Sully and Glenn for giving up the Tuesday evenings to talk about their teams and the general craziness of football. But we will be back tomorrow morning, I believe, for the Liverpool-based, for those of us who were upset about that, Liverpool-based coffee show, and then Thursday night podcast for Liverpool-based stuff again and that, okay? But other than that, enjoy your weekends, enjoy the summer, and let's hope we are all not bombed to smithereens by next week. Peace out, everybody. Have a good one. Here's the funky music.